Good morning and welcome to Introductory Logic Lesson 8. Today we're going to be talking about supported statements. Just to recap, we're talking about statements, and remember, a statement is a sentence that has a truth value, which means it can be true or false. Commands, questions, and nonsense are not statements because they do not have a truth value. The last lesson, lesson 7, we talked about statements that you can tell if they're true or false by the sentence itself. These are called self-supporting statements. So that means that just by the sentence itself, you can determine whether it's true or false. It does not need anything outside of itself to determine if it's true or false. Today, we're going to be talking about supported statements. These are statements whose truth value depend on evidence or information outside of itself. So for this one, you're given a statement, and it is a statement because it can be true or false, but you need more information than the sentence itself in order to determine whether it is true or false. So I'm going to give you 3 sentences as an example, and then we're going to look at the 3 different ways that we can get evidence for these supported statements. All right, so here's the first sentence. Solomon had a treaty with Hiram. It is raining outside. The leaning tower will fall down. All right, so these are 3 different statements that have a truth value. And all 3 of these are statements that we cannot tell whether they are true or false without going to something outside of the sentence itself. So the first method of finding evidence or information to determine its truth value is authority. So number 1 is authority. Authority is when you look to a trustworthy, authoritative outside source. So an outside, other than the sentence and outside of yourself, you're going to a source outside of you in the sentence to determine whether it's true or false. So for example, for our first sentence, Solomon had a treaty with Hiram. How could I know whether or not Solomon had a treaty? Well, I can go to scripture. It talks about it there. I can go to other historical documents where they talk about kings and rulers and treaties that they had with nations and all that. So I can look at a source that is not the sentence in me. And this is we do this a lot, especially for sentences like this where like we would not have any way of knowing whether that's true because we didn't live in that time, and we have no way of ourselves just figuring that out. We would have to have an information or evidence on that. So anytime we cannot determine by experience or whatever ourselves, we would go to authority. Number 2 is experience. Another way of saying this is observation. So an experience is when you trust, oh my gosh, it's kind of dark in here, trusting our own senses. So this would be like an inside source. So authority is looking to an outside source, someone else that's trusted and authoritative. An experience would be trusting yourself and actually your senses. So things you can see, hear, touch, taste, feel, things like that. It's you are the authority, and it's your experience that you're using to determine whether a statement is true or false. For example, with our "it is raining outside" sentence, let's say someone came to you and said it's raining outside. If you trusted them, you could just go with the authority method of, okay, well, I trust this person to be telling me the truth and they're not going to be lying to me. So, okay, it's raining outside. Let's say you don't necessarily want to take their word for it. So you go look outside or look out the window and then you see that it's raining. So this would be you as the authority checking and verifying whether or not that's true or false using your experience and observation to determine whether it's raining outside. So it's still a type of authority. The difference is experience is an inside source, yourself. You are the authority. and authority is an outside source. So that's 1 and 2. The third one is deduction. Now this deduction, if you remember from our very first introductory video talking about what is logic, we talked about deduction. This is the form of method, or not the form of method, the form of logic that we are going to be looking into. How do you deduce in reasoning? So deduction is reason to some conclusion based on other statements. So this would be an example of the word syllogism that I've used a couple of times. So you have a conclusion, and you have arrived at that conclusion from other statements. And again, we'll look into this, but this is where we're headed, is this deduction form of supported statements determining a truth value and a conclusion. So, for example here, if I were to take the sentence, the Leaning Tower will fall down, and use deduction to determine whether that statement is true or false, this is what it would sound like, or could sound like. All man-made structures will eventually fall down. The Leaning Tower is a man-made structure. Therefore, the Leaning Tower will fall down. So this is a form of using other statements, which would be called premises, which we'll get to determine whether or not the statement, which ends up being our conclusion, is true or false. And there's rules for this that we are going to get into. So that's it. Again, a very quick lesson. So again, to recap, supported statements are statements whose truth value depend on evidence or information outside of itself. And the way that we can support these statements or determine their truth value is through authority, which would be trusting an outside source, experience, which would be trusting the inside source of your senses, and deduction, which is coming to a conclusion based on other statements. And deduction is what we're going to be getting into. Before we wrap this up, there's one thing that I want to read. This is from the book, Introductory Logic, that we use in our curriculum. Okay, so it says, in his text, Logic, the hymn writer and logician Isaac Watts identifies and describes 6 methods whereby truth is let into the mind. These are 1, the evidence of the senses, that is by experience. 2, inward consciousness, similar to self-report. 3, intelligence, knowledge of self-evident propositions. 4, reasoning. 5, evidence of faith, that is by authority. And 6, direct inspiration by God. So those, as you can see, these are kind of summed up, and we've gone over many of these. So yep, that is it. So that is supported statements, statements that you need more information before you can determine whether they are true or false. And that's it for lesson 8. And we'll see you again for lesson 9.